All right, welcome everybody to this. I believe we're at the 15th Peace Roundtable. I'm honestly beginning to lose count a little bit, but these have been very important dialogue sessions that we've been doing now for a number of months, and everyone should know that these types of conversations about how to achieve peace, how to understand what's at the heart of the current conflict that's pushing us towards possible extinction. These conversations need to be much more normalized, much more regular, much more loud, and we need more activist citizens who see responsibility as part of having rights, not just simply waiting for rights to be given to us or taken away. As subjects do, but rather as citizens think of rights as being something directly connected to our responsibilities. So these little sessions that Ed provoked, I think, are very good exercises in mind and moral health, and potentially in physical health too, as we were just alluding to in the chat before the recording. And today we're going to have Vlad Goldstein as our principal speaker, as well as Ed, who has some considerations. We might get another guest as a main speaker who will show up. We'll see. But I'm very curious to see the thoughts of Professor Goldstein, who has commented very vociferously about the need to stop World War III, to introduce adults back into the conversation who could think like adults, about ending war, about introducing peace. And we are on the verge of the Elba Day conference coming up on April 23rd, which Ed is going to have something to say about, as well as the May 9th Victory Day celebrations in Russia, both of which represent some very important historic moments that we need to remember and bring back to life once again if we're going to get out of this crisis. So before we go to Vlad, I'd like Ed perhaps to say a few words.
Only a few words because I want Vlad to start right away, and I will probably speak later. The only thing I want to say is that I'm pleased that my daughter graduated from the same Brown University that Vlad is professor. So I have some connections through my daughter to him. But I also met him many times, and I read all his posts and on Facebook, and I repost them on my own sites, of course, and this magazine New Continent, which is really gaining momentum. So let's see what Vlad has to say, and then we will follow up. Okay, Vlad, it's all yours.
All right. So for starters, when the whole thing, at least 2014, siege of Crimea started, it was a very serious issue. And right away, I began to feel that the way the whole situation is presented is very wrong-headed. So I was lucky enough to publish an early piece in Forbes, of all places, where I kind of already then I suggested that Ukraine is a very complex society, very strongly divided between East and West of Ukraine. And what we have there potentially is more or less like civil war, when we have the kind of Russian speakers, Russia very heavily involved in Russian culture, Russian TV, Russian language, all their relatives and neighbors live in Russia. This is eastern part of Ukraine. And what's happened after 2014, after this Crimea and then radicalization of Ukrainian society, the interest of this Ukrainian East began to be totally ignored. And out of the blue, the West, Western Ukraine got all the ears and began to sort of somehow attract attention of the West and NATO, and they were taken as somebody who gives the voice to the whole Ukraine. And they said, this is not correct. This is like a civil war, very much strong division. Parts of Eastern Ukraine wants to belong to Russia, especially so when after kind of Maidan, the Kyiv government began to introduce tighter and tighter laws. Just imagine, we have Canada, where we have Quebec and French speakers, and the English speakers, and they coexist one way or another. They coexist, and out of the blue, one group, Quebecois, say take over and say from now on everybody speaks only French. You have, if you're a doctor or professor, you have to pass the test, only French. That's it. So they began to harass the Eastern Ukraine, and Eastern Ukrainians, their polls, there were official polls done in Ukraine, done by the West. They began to turn away from Kyiv, toward Russia. And this is like a contention. How Ukrainians should have solved? They should have solved it the way many other complicated, countries try to solve it. Be it Canada, be it Spain, where it's Catalans and this and that, and Basques, and they sort of one way or another are trying to solve it, but not to shove down the eastern Ukraine, throats. From now on, you're going to obey what we are telling you. And they began to suppress them. And of course, Russia interfered because this is their friends, relatives. Also, they felt once the United States got involved on one side, Russia felt it's a threat. We have to sort of defend, on the other side. So the whole thing was escalating, waiting to happen. And the United States, rather than, if you think about great words of John Adams, who said that, America doesn't go abroad in search of monsters to slay. We should give example to other countries in freedom, in democracy. We should serve as a kind of like a gold standard for them to follow, to give them advice. Wherever it searches liberty, we'll advise them, but not interfere. Because otherwise, as the founding fathers, American fathers, were very clear. Once we get involved and once we start searching for monsters to slay, we just got very much entangled. And the whole American sort of premise that will be, buff, we moved away from Europe, not to be entangled in all this nonsense. But now we get involved. So United States got involved for various reasons. We can go on and discussing them. But they got involved, and eventually they involved more and more, and Kyiv getting more and more aggressive, and Russia is getting more and more kind of unhappy and desperate until we have the invasion. Once we have the invasion, of course, we have to be aware that Russia was not quite ready for conventional war. For historically, they were preparing to their great, kind of rival, United States, and they were thinking that we have to have like a great nuclear arsenal. So if you think about sort of Russia, they never thought that the war would be conducted with Ukraine. With this, like United States. Canadians never thought that there will be tension with America. Now, of course, Canadians think, maybe Americans will. So the same thing with Russia were not quite ready for conventional war. So originally, despite the show of force, they turned out to be rather inefficient. But if you look at the tremendous potential of the country, in terms of resources, in terms of population, in terms of everything, it was clear that sooner or later Russia began to prevail. And that's what's sort of happening. Tough as Ukrainians are fighting, as much as weapons as they're getting, it's ugly war, it's meat grinder. Thousands of young kids from both sides are being killed, but Russia is definitely winning, and they're going to win. So, to procrastinate is basically to subject more and more Ukrainian children, Ukrainian boys, and maybe eventually we'll start, drafting girls to death. So who needs it? It has to be stopped. So I think I totally support the initiative of President Trump to somehow kind of find the solution. How do you find the solution? My feeling is that, unfortunately, Zelensky is too much vested in business as usual, and so are many European leaders. Of course, European leaders, it's up to them and up to their voters to decide if they really want to spend billions of dollars, which is needed for social services, for many other things, if they really want to do that. That's up to them. But in terms of Ukraine, it's absolutely clear to me, and that's what's sort of the thinking of Trump, and definitely the thinking in Russia, that Zelensky is not quite ready to be a peace president. Maybe he did his job in terms of, putting all his fatigue uniform, running around world capitals, throwing all these cliches about, defense of democracy, and posing in front of some kind of, Western weapons. But in terms of really reorienting, his country, because unfortunately what they were doing since 2014, they were developing a very strange Ukrainian identity, which basically based on one thing only: hate of Russia and the rejection of their Russian aspect, Russian side. Let's not forget that Ukraine was part of Russian Empire, Soviet Union for at least 350 years. So, so they're culturally very close to Russia. They are religiously very close to Russia. They are, in terms of their mentality. So all of a sudden, sort of this country, in the last 20 years, began to sort of be convinced. No, you're not Russians. You have to be different. You have to be different. With that type of philosophy, I don't think there is a way back. So my feeling is that one thing, which sort of first step, is for Ukraine to have an election and to have a president who would actually didn't present himself as a arch enemy of anything Russian, arch carrier of the weapons for NATO, carrier of the water for NATO. Once they have that type of a politician, then maybe certain changes will be introduced. It's also clear, judging by Russian history, how many soldiers were killed, that this eastern regions of Ukraine are not going back. So that's absolutely clear. That's so, and I don't think they would give back. Neither the population wants it. Ukrainian population of these territories does want it. Of course, Russians, after their sacrifice, don't want it. So, and it would be like totally sort of unacceptable. So I think number two, after Zelensky sort of is changed, the new leader should realize and accept the reality that these territories are not going back. But what this new leader, will get instead is definitely some kind of, guarantees of peace and sort of new versions of cooperation, new versions of working together, and promise that Russia is not going to, push back, because the whole paradox of Russia, if you think about the sort of Russian speakers, they will never go. The Russians already tried it. They know that, as America tried it in many other places. They're not going to push on this side of Dnieper, where people are very much pro-Ukrainian, Western Ukraine. They're not going to push there. But the segment on the south, where Odessa is, this is very, very contentious segment. It's in Russian interests to have it, to protect Crimea. It's also, Russian speakers there, which are very, very close to Russia. So I think my feeling is to have something going, to have peace going. Russia probably would have to agree not to push toward Odessa. So that will be something which they give, because obviously to have peace, you have to have compromises, and that will be some kind of a sort of, compromise. And from there on, the Russians don't need that much. Different government, different type of education. Don't sort of, brainwash your students into thinking that Russians are kind of devils incarnate. That's what they are doing. There was just the other day, I've heard on the news, it's totally stunning. There was a competition of children, 13-year, 12-year-old boys doing karate competition. And Russian kid got number 2, and Ukrainian kid got number 3. And Ukrainian kid said, "I'm not shaking your hand." This is ridiculous. This is totally ridiculous. How, children are children. Do you really need to introduce this kind of absolutely a 13th century hatred when Muslims were fighting Christians and the whole thing resulted in a crusade? Of course not. So, that once the sort of the new president will sort of reintroduce more or less normalization. And on this record, on this note, I want to add that Russia never, ever, ever, I talk to people, they don't demonize Ukrainians. Many of them may be even naive about Ukrainians. Many of them think that, they're exactly like us. They're not exactly like us. Let them be their own country. But, Russians and Ukrainians share a lot of things in common. But, okay, let them be, their own and develop in their own way. But there is I never heard, never seen expressed by Russians some kind of idea that Ukrainians are inferior, evil, as opposed to any Ukrainian who I used to have what is absolutely distressing, and I want to stress it because it might be anecdotal, but it's very revealing. The power of Ukrainian propaganda is such that many people, Ukrainian people whom I meet in the United States, in Canada, all the so-called Russian speakers communities, we would share vodka together. We would talk together. We would celebrate all common holidays together, from Easter to Christmas. Now all of a sudden, oh no, Russians, we're not talking to you. You're our enemy. So in other words, day in, day out, they watch it on TV, they hear all this sort of propaganda, and this definitely has to change. And I think that's what probably Putin's government mean by denazification is an absolute kind of a behavior, cultural and historical behavior which demonize Russians as if they are kind of inferior and so on. So these are the steps which I see, and I think Trump is absolutely sort of correct to want to stop it. The last point which I want to make, and I'll wrap it up, is I don't quite understand the position of Western leaders. Either they already invested so much that they have difficulties to back off. But look, Trump was very much in the American government was very much in the driver's seat, but they decided to back off and realize that how many more people should be killed. So if Americans can do that, why Westerners can do that? Why Starmer cannot do that? Why sort of Macron cannot do that? Well, it probably has to do something with interior politics. Maybe there is something economically is not viable in the countries, and they want to hide behind militarism. But it's more or less for the Western voters to decide. But for the time being, this is kind of the situation that Americans want sort of to settle it and understand that one way of doing it is from what I outline, but the European leaders continue to themselves remain in illusion that the war can get somewhere except Ukrainian defeat. And Zelensky continues to feed them with this kind of myth, even though more and more Ukrainians are running away, are taking military drafters. They don't want to fight. They already see that it's a lost proposition. So that's kind of my take on the whole thing.
Thank you very much, Vlad. That was very, very poignant. And yeah, just to add a thought before Ed chimes in, we're also on top of all of this. We just passed the anniversary of, on April 12th, Yuri Gagarin's first voyage to space. And I know that there has been increased discussion. The Russians just assisted the US to go to the ISS space station 5 days ago. And there has been an open discussion now about partnership on frontier technologies and cooperation on the Arctic, on space. So I think that that's something that could stimulate some of the conversations today, but also that are happening that could feasibly shift the trajectory in a positive way with positive ideas. And I'd love to get people's thoughts on that as we can continue onward. But on that note, Ed, how are you?
Vlad, thank you so much. I want to add one point. You mentioned about history, religion, and of course, economy, but then also family. So many, thousands of families which are mixed Russians and Ukrainians. And this is very important, especially for like American conservatives. I know about Europe, but in America, there's a whole movement about family values. And by what Biden and previous administrations were doing by inflicting this conflict, they forgot about it. They keep telling that they adhere to Judeo-Christian values. It's always American politicians in Congress, in the media, we adhere to Judeo-Christian values and family values. It's one of the most important. So how you can combine Judeo-Christian values when you violate basic value such as family value? Maybe Vlad will say something about this, but also want to praise Brown University, besides Vlad, that they have tremendous study called The Cost of War, and just 21st century. And if you Google Brown University Costs of War, you will see statistics, horrible, horrible statistics. Millions killed, and they do it like point by point, country by country. This is amazing things that Brown University is doing. So thanks a lot as part of the Brown. Yeah, I'm sure you know those folks who do that. But a few words about family values and how you envision why would United States would do something like that. Well, you mentioned Trump. Trump is trying to fix it, but all those previous administrations, even George Bush, who I have to admit I voted for him, and then I will have a letter from him thanking for all the work, because not only voted, I did that movement Russians for Bush, so I have praise from him, and also all kind of invitations to the White House, receptions, etc. And then he started this horrible thing with pushing Ukraine into NATO. I wrote him a letter, dear George, why are you doing this? You can find it. If you put Lazansky and Bush in Google, you'll see my letter. I was really angry at him. But, well, we have, of course, Trump has lots of problems, lots. But at least with him, we have some hope. With Biden, we had no hope at all. At least now we have some hope. So, Vlad, please say a few words about this.
Yeah, what I would like to stress here is that, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, these are, more traditional societies, they say Western Europe or United States. So they being more traditional, they still, probably try to have some kind of, correspondence between, religion and the way they live and the family and, one husband, one wife and, all these traditional things. And they take it seriously. They see that as foundation of it is, in religion, and we have to follow that and we have to obey it. And I'm not going to call any kind of values of that. Each society should develop in their own organic way. If some society feels that, we should promote gay marriage, fine, they can do that. But societies like Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia are not quite ready for that. And, Russia at least persists on that. What happens with Ukraine is total schizophrenia. The Kiev leadership tries to, appeal to this, neoliberal, neoconservative sort of, Western agenda and appear holier than Pope and appear holier than sort of any woke sort of, center, and they bring in all these kind of fashionable things while society is not quite ready for that. So, consequently, Ukrainian society is totally kind of schizophrenic. And by the way, I mentioned Georgia for this reason. When recently there were a lot of, protests and tensions in Georgia, it was because Georgia take their religion seriously, and they don't. And for them, joining EU and Europe is fine, but joining, kind of woke Europe, when Europeans tell them that you have to have, gay parades on every Monday or something, Georgians say we don't want it. So they have protests. Of course, what we hear in the West about this protest is not that this is kind of cultural, maybe conservative, traditional protest. What we hear in the West, it's pro-Russian. They're not pro-Russian. They actually don't like Russians. They want to be independent from Russia. But they're a traditional society. The same thing with Ukraine, but Ukraine is enforced. So local Ukrainians, they don't want that, especially if not elite from Kiev, whose children are already somewhere probably not far from me in Mallorca, on the yachts which their parents stole from American taxpayers. But in any case, these guys are ready for that, but not the traditional society. So Russia is much more consistent in this, and they are kind of trying to develop according to their history, while Ukraine is just schizophrenic, the way as they force Russian speakers all of a sudden to turn into Ukrainians, as the same thing they speak traditional village people who say, oh, no. Forget about marriage as being between man and a woman. So that's a tension. So I'm sure that a lot of Ukrainians from Eastern Ukraine will be more than happy to join. Maybe others too, but that's already kind of more complicated issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
We open up for a little bit of dialogue with the audience. I know there's a few questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Bruce de Torres was early to get in there. So, Bruce, I know you have a question. Go for it.
Yes, for Vlad, how would you describe this? I'm convinced that the West, NATO, et cetera, is playing Ukraine as a puppet and a victim toward its just complete exploitation. What are your thoughts about that, please?
I agree. I agree with you. That was absolutely sort of ill conceived. They don't really care about the Ukrainians, but there was a sort of maybe some sort of strategic thinking. I imagine in the United States, be it like Rand Corporation, other kind of think tanks, that before we get to our main arch rival, China, we have to make sure that we weaken Russia, enough. And after we weaken it, maybe we'll sort of be able to get, closer access to its resources and so on. So that was kind of their strategy. Let us, do something. Let's find a way. And so Ukraine turned out to be a pawn into this game. And we all know that it's very cynical to play with people's lives, but that was happened. I'm not sure that NATO leaders really care about some peasant from kind of Western Ukraine feels or wants to do. No, but it was a very comfortable pawn. Let's sort of arm them. Let's weaken Russia, and then we've heard it again and again being repeated, especially when the war wasn't that strongly leaning to Russia. Russia is too big. It's time to break it up. It's time to sort of to break it, and then once Russia is broken, we'll get some juicy pieces, and then we are ready, sort of with sort of what we got from Russia. We are ready to confront our next rival. So that China. So that's my feeling. That's how it was viewed, and it was viewed, basically the consensus was that Russia is still very, very weak. That Russia, lost, population, lost its economic base after, perestroika. So Russia is not quite ready. Turns out, that Russia has, was not quite ready then, but this is a country of tremendous potential, and that's what's happened with Russia vis-a-vis Germany. When German machine in 1941 invaded Russia, they were much stronger. But don't forget, Russia has giant territory, so they can withdraw. They prepare. They start working. They work day and night. And there's culturally, the Russians are. This is kind of their, I would say, very strong suit. Yeah, for the time being, we're kind of lazy. But if we feel existential threat, then you better run out. And that's actually, I'm saying, I study Russian culture, I study sort of ethos, I study sort of behavior, I study sort of what Russian kind of main thinkers think. Read again about Tolstoy, how he presents war and peace. Yeah, Russians for a while, okay, so Napoleon comes over, Napoleon takes over Moscow. But then, once you get this kind of this wake up the bear, you better run out. And that's actually, I think, still remains the case. So I think, there was total miscalculation on the part of Western leadership in the United States that we can use Ukraine to weaken and eventually sort of to break up Russia. It's not going to happen.
Thank you.
Gerald Pechenuk wrote a little message that I thought was worth sharing from one of his Russian sources who wrote, and I'll just read it. Very few know that in Witkoff's new trip to Russia prior to the meeting with Putin, Witkoff also met Thursday with Kirill Dmitriev, head of the Russian RDIF and special envoy of Putin. And Dmitriev and Witkoff went together to the great, beautiful St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, one of the landmark cathedrals of the Russian Orthodox Church. This cathedral is dedicated to Saint Isaac of Dalmatia, a 4th century monk venerated by the Russian Orthodox Church, whose feast day coincided with the birthday of Peter the Great. A good sign. I like that. I appreciate that little message. Tony Pappert has some thoughts or considerations and maybe a question that he wanted to toss out there. So, Tony, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Matt. It's really a statement. In response to Vlad, I mean, I really appreciate your deep humanism. And you quoted John Quincy Adams, one of our first secretaries of state. We go not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. What has to be understood is that there's not one America. There's been two Americas since well before our revolution. That two factions which have continued throughout American history from the early 18th century and through today, which what Franklin Roosevelt called the American patriots versus the American Tories, and or today we can call globalists, a faction which responds to the European oligarchy and not to the United States. I mean, the whole history was changed deeply by Franklin Roosevelt's early death and the takeover of a ignorant and manipulable Harry Truman, who was captured by Winston Churchill and set it, set a path of American foreign policy totally different to Roosevelt's or a patriotic tradition. I mean, this you can all read about a lot in Elliott Roosevelt's book, As He Saw It. Franklin Roosevelt was determined that the British and French colonialists who had fled Asia before the Japanese would not be allowed back, that these countries would have independence or would move toward independence, whereas Truman sent U.S. troops to usher the French back into Indochina and, the tragedy which results from that. And today what's happened is that the American patriotic tradition, which is totally different from what you're used to in recent history, has again taken over. And the European oligarchy has a problem that if they don't control the United States, they don't control much of anything. And what's going on is that, these European governments who are insane are insisting on conducting their own war with Russia, as Vlad referred to, that if the US is going to make peace, that's going to stop them. They're going to continue to make war. I mean, this is the European oligarchy which brought us the 20th century of war, from World War I to World War II to all the many, many wars which have happened since in the 20th and 21st. So, I mean, again, brief and perhaps too brief, but this is the reality. There's not one America, there are two. And there's this notion about, I mean, I don't want to ridicule it, but this statement that, the US wants to have done with conflict with Russia so it can go on and have conflict with China. This doesn't represent the patriotic American tradition or the Trump administration. It's just a reflex of geopolitics, so-called, which is nothing but British European oligarchism refashioned as an academic doctrine.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I do think that there are some actors around the Trump administration who do think that China is a pretty big target that they would like to destroy. But I agree with you, to differentiate those two traditions is very important, and to see the better part of America represented within Trump's administration as part of a fight. I think that that's healthy to do it that way. I don't know if Ed or Vlad, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would like to have a few words to say. I think you're correct, Tony, to bring this kind of European tradition, and I think it's probably maybe culturally it's more kind of typical of Europe. Maybe they get used to more kind of order and organization. If you think about, from 1930s, from Brave New World, there is
Yes.
this kind of ideas. I know A.G. Wells was writing about a society run by some kind of elite. So I think somehow kind of there's much more respect for elites and for kind of guardians, for educated elite who can somehow organize it. And let's look at this, what is EU? It was actually, people who were behind organization of EU were the similar people that we somehow, with our rationality, with our scientific approach, we can somehow organize it. And actually from EU, you push further and you organize the world, and then out of the blue, some pesky Russia wants to do something differently. Like I remember when Russia sort of did something, there was a Kerry, American, Secretary of State, said, "Oh, you don't do things like that from 19th century. Don't bring 19th century, politics." So somehow kind of, no, we're educated, we're elite, in America, you're absolutely correct. There is like this tradition of elites. Very, very, many people are very, very suspicious of that. They basically know that that's each country sort of let them develop on their own as far as we can sort of trade and benefit and so on. That's fine. Whatever tradition you have. So there's certain in the United States there's certain kind of suspicion of these guardians, and that's why we have suspicion of Fauci. We have suspicion of this. We have suspicion of that. So this is probably cultural confrontation. You're absolutely correct within the United States, and that's why United States actually jumped the ship, so to speak, and said, "Wait a minute, let's pause with this war. We don't where we're going. We cannot obviously." How many people should be killed until we introduce new world order? It's going to be a third world war. So we introduced new world order. Over 3 people who left remain. So United States was kind of backed off. In Europe, I think elitism is much stronger. So they just think, oh no, our calculations were such that we have to.
What the EU is set up to do, which is EU is set up to do, extinguish nation states. Most important being the United States and also Russia, frankly.
Well, Matt, if I can simply a couple of points to this interesting discussion. First, about the other America. I think I mentioned earlier that Matt and I produced a film called The Other America.
Oh.
And maybe we are ready maybe for a sequel and for a second version and include some of people in this group. Because this first version, we had maybe like 5 or 6 prominent Americans, mainly from the former government officials, from State Department, from CIA, who became disillusioned with American policy and criticizing it. But now let's have a broader version, and many people in this group probably have something to say about it. So Matt, I suggest that we do a second version of The Other America. And also, Vlad mentioned something important, which I actually published article last week, meeting on the Dnieper, because we're going to celebrate, and Matt already mentioned, April 25. It's a very important day, I think, for our movement too, Elbe River reunion. And this is when Russians and Americans were like embracing each other, drinking, dancing, singing, very emotional event, April 25, 1945. And every year we celebrate this event now with new technologies. In the past, it was just only Russians who was assembled in downtown Moscow, and there's a sculpture of meeting on the Elbe, and some Americans who were at the time tourists. But now with new technologies, we connect with many people, not only in Russia and America, but many other countries. And of course, we will send you the link on April 25, so you can follow. This will be maybe 3-4 hours event. You don't have to stay all 3-4 hours, but you'll be watching, because we prepare like a show. Again, remember those days with singing, dancing. We have choirs from different countries. Really great show. So you can watch it. But then what Vlad mentioned something about Dnieper, that let's just understand that the left part on the Dnieper or right one, which is more kind of West Ukraine and different attitudes toward Russia. So we thought, and I published an article called "Meeting on the Dnieper," so we can maybe have Americans in Russia. This is how to create peace in Ukraine: to have Americans and Russians, and some Europeans if they want to join, and be just on the Dnieper River, which divides those two parts, and this can be a way to have peace. In any event, this is something to think about, and I want to use this opportunity to thank many people in this group who sent the video, short video statement. Yes, all of you are still welcome. If you do that, then we can include it, and it will be shown during this celebration on April 25. It has to be not long, like 3-5 minutes. And this is when we talk about a spirit of Elba, spirit of camaraderie, friendship, talk about peace, no more wars, and then start doing something positive. There are many, many projects that we can do together, and we'll allow people to say it. And if you want to make sure that you are in this video, just send it to me, short statement. Again, I already said maybe 5 or 6 people in this group send it already, so they will be already part of this history. So we are now given kind of a not birth, because birth, Elba spirit was in 45. Now we try to resurrect it, the Elba spirit. So I really urge you, and Vlad, of course, you also please find a few minutes in this beautiful location you are and record maybe a few minutes of what you think about Elba spirit. Okay, well, Matt, it's back to you.
Great, thanks, Ed. Yeah, and will that broadcast also be broadcast with English translations that people can also follow, or will it just
Yeah,
be?
it's in
Yeah.
English, of course. Do it in
Okay.
English, we'll get simultaneous translations. Right?
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so that's on April 25th. Everyone should get that invitation out, and also I encourage people to pass on the invitation as well to your network, to your friends, your family, people that you know who are looking for bigger ideas needed to really help thwart the danger of World War III. I really advise you to take action and to help spread that. The other thought, as you were speaking, The Other America, I love the idea of a sequel. For those who want to watch part one, the first Other America film. It's in the chat box and in the description box under this video when it's going to go up online. It's a fantastic film featuring a lot of the work that Ed Lazansky has done over the years to achieve peace between U.S. and Russia and more broadly. And the last thing I would just share, since again it's April, we just passed the April 12th anniversary of the death of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I just wanted to share a little bit of a quote, because Vlad, in his last remarks, commenting on this elitist technocratic sickness of the mind, which has really done a lot of damage, FDR spoke to this amidst World War II. And I saw this quote on his monument in Washington, D.C. some years ago, where FDR said, "Some people like talking about a new world order, but I'll say one thing, it's not new and it's not order." I think he recognized that this was just a romanticization of a restoration of feudalism in a different language, perhaps, but the same thing. And I think it's really important to review what FDR's mission was as far as a vision that was concrete to externalize, to internationalize the New Deal reforms that had really transformed the United States and broken the power of the Wall Street and City of London banks during the 1930s by bringing in big projects that were multi-generational, and to do that with an idea of assisting other nations to also break free of the shackles of 18th century methods of colonialism that had held them back for so long. So my last little quote I just want to end with here is Henry Wallace, who said something really, really good in 1946. He was the former vice president of Franklin Roosevelt, and he wrote a little document, a little booklet called Soviet Asia Mission, before he was fired by Truman because he was still calling for reviving FDR's vision and creating peace to avoid the Cold War. And he says in this little booklet, before the blood of our boys is scarcely dry on the field of battle, these enemies of peace try to lay the foundation for World War III. These people must not succeed in their foul enterprise. We must offset their poison by following the policies of Franklin Roosevelt in cultivating the friendship of Russia in peace as well as in war. So I thought that was a nice statement that has a lot of meaning, especially today, 80 years after it was spoken originally. So I just wanted to share that before we phase out of today's broadcast. I don't know if Ed or Vlad have any final thoughts they'd want to share.
I just want to add something because as we were speaking, I got a message from Jeffrey Sachs, and very interesting. And I will just, it's a long one, but I will give you like a quote. The thing is that one is a group which will be helping us on April 25. It's called Assembly of Peoples of Eurasia. And it's a very good group. And actually they helped us in the past when we were doing some actions like planting trees of friendship. And then we had interesting event, which I think, Matt, you were part of on June 6th. June 6th is a D-Day. D-Day, and we thought it would be important to discuss why Russia is not invited for D-Day. By the way, Russia is also not invited in Germany to celebrate the end of World War II. And also to talk about liberation of camps, of Nazi camps. So Russia is not invited as well. So we decided to have session, and it was interesting that June 6th, it's Alexander Pushkin birthday, 1799, and meeting the townhouse office of Assembly of People in Eurasia is next to a statue of Pushkin. So I wrote articles saying what Pushkin has to do with D-Day. And I said, well, first, because D-Day is his birthday. And second, that we are assembling next to him, to this greatest Russian poet, by the way, with African roots. And we had many speakers from no similar group from different countries who were talking, really saying that it's a horrible thing that Russia is not invited because D-Day happened, if not for Soviet, advances on the Eastern Front, D-Day may not succeed at all. Well, this talks about the values. Again, keeps repeating this word values because I still want Western values are great. This is something why we came, Vlad and I think, came to America because American values. But it now looks it's on paper it's good, but now not on in reality. Well, this is something that got food for thought.
If I can add my 2 cents, you mentioned not invited, and I think this is a very fundamental issue that when we don't see people, when we're not invited, when we do not travel, when we do not see face to face, what being ushered in is projections, demonization. So that's why it's very easy for Russians. Russians now are doing the same thing. It's not that easy for them to travel to the West, and not easy to see people. So they began to imagine the West as this mess of kind of lunatics, murderers, Russophobes. So they project on that. The same thing with the West. They don't see Russians. There's no cultural exchanges, no any other exchanges. So it's very easy to sort of imagine Russians as being kind of these little robots who are marching under the drumbeat of Putin. And once you sort of make that step, the next step is, oh, if they're not humans, maybe we can bomb them. And this is a recipe to the violence, as opposed to sort of, just precisely, being invited, visiting, seeing. And I think that's probably a tribute to Trump and Witkoff and whatever. They've been around. They actually, they're not provincial people. They've seen, they dealt with China, they dealt with Russia. So they understand that this is like the same human beings with the same kind of values, the same interests, and we can find something in common to work toward something better rather than just, oh, you are the devil and I'm an angel, or Ukraine is angel, Russia is a devil, and let's bomb them and solve all the problems. That's all kind of unacceptable, but it's a first step toward actual violence. When we don't know people, we project upon them God knows what.
Absolutely. Well said. I just noticed that we got two folks who requested to chime in before we close out today's session. We're nearly at the top of the hour, but we still have a bit of time. So Bruce and Monty, you guys both have the ability to speak, throw a question or a thought in. Bruce, I saw you first, and then Monty. So Bruce.
Thank you. I want to thank Matt and Alex Craner. Recently recommended my Substack, and every day I'm getting new subscribers. Every day for like the last 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. It's almost unbelievable. And I just want to encourage everybody here. I think there's 39 participants at this moment, to create something like a Substack or, on your Facebook or whatever. And just as your first project, if you don't normally post, promote these roundtables and promote the event, at the end of April. And you'll be so gratified if you're nervous about doing that, just to see how there's such a need for hope. And this material and all these contributions are just, they feed that, they just give so much hope. And my last point or question is, how do I ensure I get a notice of how to participate at the end of April on the celebration day? Can I rely on Matt or Ed to be emailing that, at least to we attendees here? And where is there a link that I could share on my platforms to promote it to, whoever I can?
Yeah, we will send you the link to everyone in this group. We will send the link, and you're welcome to send it to your friends, colleagues, and definitely.
So it'll be well in advance of the day?
Yeah, at least a week in advance. But day is April 25.
Right, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Monty.
Yes, thank you very much. And regards from Baja, Mexico. I was also watching Alex Craner, and he posed an interesting hypothesis that maybe this situation that's happening with the closing down of the Red Sea, what effectively it's doing is it's shutting down all traffic now, which is really targeting the EU and NATO. In other words, it's bringing a lot of pain on them. And so it brought about in my mind this question of whether Trump is actually a buffoon, or is he acting like a buffoon? Because we're in a situation now, for instance, where in the United States, they put hundreds of thousands of people on the streets against the Doge and against this and against that. But if you look at it very carefully, it was not hands off America or hands off, it was really hands off NATO. So they're really effective. This work is really coming down to the point that the mass of American population is really, they've got to feel some pain in order to maybe come around to sanity. And what I'm thinking is the real war is about killing the dollar and killing NATO and the EU, insofar as this war of attrition, of making them incapable of continuing to fight this war. And I think with the tariff fiasco, what's becoming apparent now is the United States is weak insofar as the dollar, and so far as their ability to project their power through the dollar. And also with NATO and the EU, which to me is really one thing. Since the Treaty of Lisbon in 2008, NATO no longer has the capacity to really fight. And so I think this is becoming very apparent. So maybe behind the scenes, what's happening, at least I hope so, is that Trump is acting the buffoon to play a role insofar as what we're seeing unfolding in reality, the demise of the dollar and the demise of EU and NATO, which is really pushing this whole agenda. So that's my 2 cents.
I think we're all hoping that there's some method behind the madness at play, and that there are some adults in the room somewhere. So I mean, I generally share the statements that you made, and the hopes. We'll see. I mean, it's a precarious time to be alive, that's for sure, and a very interesting time where we're going to see some big changes that will certainly affect many generations to come, for good or for bad. But I mean, I thank you, everybody. I mean, we're reaching the top of the hour. I think that we went through a lot of material today. Really, this is good for the mind and the soul. And like I said, if we all can use these as amplifiers for peace, the bodies of many many living human beings on the earth can be preserved by these types of conversations and these types of ideas. Taking the best of our history with a look towards the deep future in mind. And as Ed pointed out, we're going to make available the invitations for the next roundtables, as well as the Elba Day summit coming up. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Ed, Vlad, everybody, thank you so much for sharing these ideas today, and I look forward to continuing this in the weeks ahead.
Vlad, thank you so much. You really made it lively.
Enjoy seeing everyone. Bye.
Thanks,
Great.
Vlad.
We're doing what we can, and let's stay with Elba spirit. This is a new movement, and I think many things that people here mentioned, they will be people come not just to say a few words, but they present their own ideas, and the same thing, like for example. Building a tunnel from Alaska, many people want to talk about it, how we can have Chukotka, Alaska tunnel. Let's concentrate on that instead of nuclear weapons, how we can annihilate each other. Let's hope. We can only hope, and not only hope, but do something about this. Thank you.
Man, bye, guys.